Welcome to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm your host, Alex Epstein. This week, the topic is how I learn from other people's systems. And the origin of this week's topic is last week's show, which was called An Innovative Psychotherapist. And it was after 30-some episodes, the first ever time I had a guest on the show. And it was a guy named Brent Charlton, who's a psychotherapist and an executive coach. And we did an interview that was around an hour and 45 minutes. And the reaction to the interview was really interesting and raised this issue of it raised some issues. And the two biggest issues I got when people were talking to me were, one, why did you pick this particular guest? And some people were really happy with the guest. Some people thought, oh, this guy's not so innovative. And then, even more interesting to me, why did you interview him the way that you did? And certain people pointed out or said to me, you weren't as hard on the guest as I expected you to be. And both of these are really interesting questions, and I thought I would tell you about both why I chose the guest, but maybe even more interestingly, why I interviewed him the way that I did, because it really goes to my views on learning other people's systems, which is something that I talk about over and over on the show, and that I think is an art that I've gotten pretty good at. So when we talk about other people's systems, several episodes ago, maybe 4 or 5 or 6, I had an episode called The Search for Superior Systems, The Search for Superior Systems, and recommend listening to that, maybe even before listening to this. But to give you an overview, I talked about 3 attributes I look for when I'm looking for a superior system, which is a system that I can learn and benefit from. So one is that the person who creates it has an unusually clear and integrated understanding of their field. 2 is that they have a transferable system, so something I can use or someone else can use that embodies their understanding. And then 3, that system works for a lot of people when applied to life with all the complications of real life. So all of those are very desirable. But sometimes you don't get all of those things. In fact, you almost never get all of those things. But what I'm looking for at the core of those things is I'm looking for people who have working systems that I can benefit from. And the key to that, above all, is that they seem to have results that I want and that I don't know how to get. And so this premise is the reason why I wanted to talk to Brent and why I've become interested in Brent. What was intriguing to me about Brent was that, and still is, that he seems to have a system of therapy that can change people's fundamental way of thinking about themselves. A system of therapy that can change people's fundamental way of thinking about themselves. And this is something that has a lot of appeal to me, and that I've definitely gotten to some extent in my own experience thinking about psychology, applying things, seeing therapists. But I've had a belief for a long time that it's possible to get even considerably better results than I have so far. And I raised this a little bit last week in terms of how I view the current schools of psychology. And it's not at all that I have any kind of comprehensive assessment, but I have studied a bit and done a bunch of experimentation. So there's the cognitive behavioral school, and there's a lot to that, certainly in terms of the relationship between thoughts and emotions. There's just a really strong relationship there. But I have a concern that there's a certain superficiality about it and the way that sometimes emotions are approached or thoughts are approached, and that there's more going on in the subconscious, and particularly more that went on in its development, that seems to be relevant to a person getting better in a fundamental way. And I've just seen in different ways people who get really good at cognitive stuff and it really improves their life, but it's still like it seems like there's something still superficial. So definitely good, but it just seemed like, oh, there's something more. And then the school of psychoanalysis, and I'm just giving 2 schools, I'm not at all being comprehensive here, but the 2 kind of approaches I'm most familiar with that have clear some validity to them and also some flaws is when people talk about psychoanalysis really focusing on the subconscious, including its development, they're really getting at people have fundamental ways of thinking about themselves, and they explore that a lot, but generally people don't seem to be able to change in a way that's manifesting positively throughout their lives. So that's been my own experience with these different approaches. I found a lot of benefit from looking at my past and understanding myself, understanding my development, understanding my subconscious. That's really valuable. And also, to some extent, with some of the cognitive behavioral techniques, although I think I have more to do to learn about those, and I'm interested in exploring those more. But just from like looking at what's out there, I hadn't seen something that really seemed to be that really seemed to work in the way that it seemed possible to work, in the way that I would want things to work, and that there are fundamental ways of thinking about myself that really don't make sense, are really not part of being a healthy adult, but I picked those up, and in some way I still have them. And is there a way of trying to change them in a way that will really manifest positively throughout my life? Now, one person who's been a big influence on me, who was mentioned in a critical comment, although an interesting comment on Facebook, was someone named Edith Packer, who's unfortunately not alive anymore, but I was quite familiar with her work, and I actually saw her as a therapist, and she taught me a ton and benefited me a ton. And she definitely had a combination of cognitive stuff and what I would consider the good parts of psychoanalysis. I think she had a really good appreciation of the subconscious, and she had an essay I think somebody mentioned called Understanding the Subconscious, and it was based on a lecture called Understanding the Subconscious. And that really shaped my way of thinking about how the mind works. And she talks about something called core evaluations. And there's definitely a lot there, but my view is that she didn't seem to have like a fully developed system for translating this into people getting better pretty quickly. Now, do I know that that's possible? I'd say not yet. I don't know fully. But when I would hear people talk about what Brent was doing, including some people who were familiar with both, they would say, "Oh, well, this guy really has a process." And the way people would describe the results, and people that I respect and people who don't seem crazy and who have experience with things that I have experience with, they'd say, "Oh yeah, there's something about this where this guy seems to have really cracked the code in terms of how do you change your fundamental way of thinking." And then when I heard about the framework that he had, including the view of the ego states as child, teen, and adult, you can of course listen to last week's episode if you want to get all the details on this, and then the different categories of life that we have these different ego states about. So things like our view of worth, our view of our needs, our view of safety, those did seem fundamental, and they resonated with me as, I'm those are things that are always going on. So it wasn't that, I have a sense of his full theory and that's written out somewhere, but I had a sense of, this guy's understanding of the world seems right in a lot of ways, but more importantly, the results people are attributing to him and paying him for and recommending him for seem right, and not just like somebody, some motivational speaker changed my life, but the way they're describing the causation that they're experiencing seemed right given what I think I know. So that's where the reason I wanted to talk to him, and I'm interested in him in general and learning more from his approach in general, and maybe I'll even become a client of his at some point. The reason for that is that he seems to have a really powerful working system that gets unique results. And so anytime I see that, I am really eager to talk to somebody, and I'm really eager to learn. And this leads to the second thing. So one is I want somebody with a unique working system. Like I'm really interested in talking to them. But then the second issue that came up is, why are you talking to him in a certain way? And some people had a sense of me as not sufficiently critical. So Brent would say something and they would think, oh, why didn't you probably don't fully agree with that, or you might think that's exaggerated, or you might totally disagree with it. So why aren't you challenging him more where I would expect you, Alex, to disagree? And in general, I, Alex, am a big advocate of being really rigorous when we acquire knowledge about is this right? Is this true? Validation and then integration. Does this fit in with everything I know or think I know? And yet when I'm interviewing him, there were some parts where I would push back and follow up, but there are often parts where he would say something and you might think Alex might have an issue with that, but I didn't pursue it. So an extreme example would be where he mentioned he was talking about the nature of the range of emotions we experience in life and why he likes to think of the emotional goal as contentment versus happiness. Now, part of that I really pushed back on to get clear on what he meant. But then he mentioned something about, well, this plane of existence has a lot more growth and challenge or something to that effect. Now, when somebody talks about planes of existence, I only believe in one plane of existence. So I could have a discussion about, well, what do you mean by other planes of existence? And then if he believes in any kind of supernatural plane, then we would talk about that. And then we could, but notice if I talk about that, then I'm committing myself to talking about a significant subject. And then I only have a certain amount of time with somebody. So my question is, how do I decide what to go into and how do I decide what not to go into? And from one perspective, you might think, well, I should decide to go into anything or at least voice disagreement any time that somebody says something that I think is inaccurate in any way, including imprecise in any way. And I have thought about, is that the right way to do interviews on a show? And it may be in certain circumstances, but in terms of the way that I learn from people, that's definitely not what I do. Because when I'm learning from somebody, my goal is not to challenge everything that they say and make sure that my opinion on it is clearly understood. My goal is to understand their system. And in particular, I want to understand everything I can about their system that might be useful to me and that I might be able to use later. So more specifically, I would think there are basically three questions that I want to know about with somebody's system. So one is, what's the goal of their system? And I want to be clear on that. And that's why I had an extended discussion of what do you think the goal emotionally is? And then what are the methods of achieving it? What do you actually advocate in terms of action? And then why do those methods work? What's your understanding of the world, in this case, human psychology, that makes your particular methods work and that even make your goals suitable goals to have? And I feel like when I get that, I have an outline, or some people might call it a mental model of how they're approaching something. And then when I have that, it gives me a lot of power, because then I can decide, once I have the outline of it, then I can decide, okay, is this worth pursuing at all? And then if so, what about it is worth pursuing? And then in particular, there's a chance that I can test it. And often the best thing to do with a system, if we can do it cost effectively, is to test it or to test some part of it. I remember when I was getting interested in meditation, I posed a question on Facebook. I said, hey, I had seen, what would you do in my situation? I saw this video where Jerry Seinfeld, attributed a lot of his success with the show to transcendental meditation because that gave him a lot of energy. And it gave him a unique ability to basically generate energy through this very deep form of relaxation. And he said, you just have to do this. And I asked different people's opinions, and I got a lot of things like, well, I wouldn't do this until I really looked into it, et cetera, and it costs money. And, if the more money it costs, then that is a deterrent. But I was in a situation where I was working on a book and I could afford whatever it was, like the $1,000 for the class. And I had good reason. I had reason to think there's something here and I want to test it. And so then I did take the class. And I tested it and I saw, okay, there's something really valuable. And then I've had that value for the last four 4.5 years. And just this ability to generate relaxation, to generate mental clarity, to generate mental energy on demand. And that's been incredibly powerful. But it's important that my goal was I wanted to get this system quickly and learn it quickly versus question every aspect of it. And that how much you question is going to be based on what you think, what the cost is to really learn it and try it, and then what the potential downsides are. So if you're dealing with a cancer drug or something like that, you don't want to just be so cavalier about it. But nevertheless, it is really valuable to get the outline of somebody's system. One question I find to be useful when I'm trying to get the outline of their system, when I'm just talking to somebody and I have finite time and I feel like they might have something unique that I can learn from, is I think about, is there anything I would want to know that I couldn't guess on my own? So for example, I brought up a couple of examples about, hey, how do you think of something like bipolar disorder? There was another one I brought up. Oh, OCD. And actually, when I looked back on my interview, one of my main objections was, I wish I had asked him about more issues. I had heard him in the workshop talk about divorce, and I thought it was fascinating to hear his perspective on that. And I find that with a system, often the applications of it are very illuminating into, is there wisdom here? How good a thinker is this person? So actually, my regrets are mostly around, I wish I had asked for this application and this application and this application, because I'm not at a level of understanding it where I can just automatically figure that out for myself. Now, I want to emphasize that it takes being very deliberate about understanding the outline of somebody's system to really get at it, because it's so easy to be tripped up by things that are not really essential to that goal, but that are essential to, say, the goal of expressing one's opinion. So, and another example where this came up was Brent had a criticism of cognitive behavioral therapy through at least mentioning his experience, and he talked about how he would observe this phenomenon of people using that kind of therapy for one issue, and then they would have success with that issue, but then another issue would crop up. So there was this phenomenon of, okay, I'm dealing with symptoms but not the root. And somebody legitimately pointed out to me, this doesn't seem to be fully fair. There might be something there, and there probably is something there, but this doesn't seem to be fully fair to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because people do get a lot of meaningful change from that. And was Brent being too dismissive of that? And here's how I think of that when I'm doing an interview like this, or when I'm learning from somebody, is I just want to understand directionally what their opinion is and what the logic of it is. And then later I can go back and think, okay, is this exaggerated? And if I'm really unsure, I want to hear their defense, I can try to ask them later. But what I took from that was, directionally, I thought he was making an intriguing point about how, this in terms of, there's something where people are having this experience of they're dealing with symptoms and not the core. And I can see, there's something there, and I get what he's saying. And so great, now I can move on from that and ask more, because what I really want is I want the big picture, and I'm not going to be able to assess the big picture until I get the big picture. And if I get stuck on a detail that I don't need to go into a huge amount of depth on, then I'm not going to get the big picture, and then I'm not going to be able to potentially benefit from the system, because I won't have any idea what the system is. So I hope that's helpful as just a perspective, because I've found it just really, really helpful to know in life, when am I on the premise of I want to understand somebody's perspective versus when am I on the premise of I want to validate or challenge their perspective. And the first thing I need to do is understand it. And when it's a person where the time is limited, I really want to make sure I understand it, because that's going to give me the most benefit later. One realm where you might find this useful, or I find this useful, is definitely the realm of any kind of advice that people give me, or when I meet someone new and I think they might have a perspective that I can use in terms of, they might have, sometimes I meet someone new, they'll give me a perspective on something, but often it's somebody more of a mentor, actually, that says, that's giving me advice or feedback Feedback is another example. And what I find is that people sometimes when taking feedback or advice, they'll get hung up on one aspect and say, no, like I disagree that my voice was off on this one thing. And if somebody says, hey, like your voice sounded off here, first of all, if somebody says that kind of thing, they're probably right to some degree, even if they're exaggerating. But what I really want to get is, okay, you think my voice is off. That's plausible. I want to hear more. I want to hear your whole assessment and then the reasons for it. And then I can go back and evaluate it. But if I just challenge you on anything that I think is wrong or might be exaggerated, then I'm not going to get the big picture, and then I'm not going to potentially get value from it. And often in life, people that we get a ton of value from, we end up concluding are not totally right about something, but they're right enough directionally where there's a really, really big insight to get. But I don't know how to get that insight unless I really get the outline of their system. So that's today's topic. Look forward to hearing any kind of feedback that you have. If you have any questions, comments, love mail, or hate mail, you can email me at alex@alexepstein.com. Keep commenting on Facebook, facebook.com/humanflourishingproject. And to get weekly updates about the show, go to humanflourishingproject.com. Also, you can now, if you go to, I have a personal YouTube page, so if you just search Alex Epstein on YouTube, it should come up pretty quickly. And we are quickly uploading old episodes and soon to be all episodes of the Human Flourishing Project. So if you want to catch up on old episodes, or maybe more importantly, share them with other people, having them on YouTube, I think will be way better than certainly having them on SoundCloud, but also, we'll still post them there too, but also even having them on iTunes. I think YouTube is in many ways the best platform these days and super easy to share. Everyone uses it from 5-year-olds to CEOs. So if you think somebody can benefit from the Human Flourishing Project, please share the YouTube page with them. Okay, next week I will be back with another topic, probably the third part of Arnold Bennett, which I still haven't gotten to, maybe something else. But in any case, until next time, I'm Alex Epstein. This has been the Human Flourishing Project.